right, good afternoon and happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. This is Andrew Fingerman, the CEO here at PhotoShelter. It's my pleasure to present to you today a new webinar, Top Techniques for Archiving and Metadata. This is a special one for us, especially because it's presented in conjunction with the American Society of Picture Professionals. Now, the American Society of Picture Professionals is near and dear to my own heart because this past year I became part of the Board of Trustees at ASPP. And this is really the first of many new content initiatives that you should expect to see and enjoy. And you can learn more about ASPP at aspp.com. So of course, this topic, archiving and metadata, is very, very central to what we do here at PhotoShelter every day. We've actually specialized in presenting an online archive and various business tools for photographers since 2005. And I don't want to take up any more of your time. What I would like to do is introduce Sam Merrell, who is the National Vice President of ASPP. And you have a wonderful caretaker to shepherd you through this conversation today with David. Sam is, in addition to his role on ASPP, an experienced consultant in digital imaging and metadata and image management tactics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Sam. Sam is going to conduct the interview with David, and I hope you enjoy today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and welcome to all of you to ASPP's first webinar. I cannot tell you how pleased we are to begin this series and to have as many of you as are with us this afternoon. Andrew has already told us what we're going to learn about with our guest, David Riecks, photographer. I would remind you that we are monitoring our Twitter account for the hashtag ASPP webinar if you have questions. Also, if you have questions, you can just ask using the webinar software, the little chat link, because we have Sarah out there monitoring the chat for us. So without further ado, let me introduce David Riecks. His facts are self-evident. He's been in the metadata scene since before there was metadata, and has been very, very active in setting up the standards and in some cases even building the organizations that are supporting and endorsing metadata and making it more useful for all of us. I would urge you to check out David's website, controlledvocabulary.com, or photometadata.org if you want some basic, real solid information about what metadata is, how it works, what the problems are that are associated with metadata, and so on and so forth. And lastly, I would be irresponsible if I didn't congratulate David for his real strong role in the industry. In my opinion, he should be a permanent digital preservation guru. ASPP is not a large organization, but we're special because not only are we professionals and do we push our best practices out to all of our members and guests who come to our educational events, we're special because we are a big tent organization. And by big tent, I mean that we've got the image suppliers as well as buyers and selectors in our association. So you've got the whole span of the photo industry: photographers, picture researchers, photo editors, photo buyers, stock agents, digital asset management staff, and to all of those people, we provide education and networking opportunities through our national offices, which are bringing you this webinar, and also through 5 local chapters in the New England area in Boston, the New York chapter. DC South is in Washington. We have a chapter in Chicago. And we have 2, if you will, split chapters or sub-chapters on the West Coast in Los Angeles and Seattle. We have a website, aspp.com. We're on Facebook, and we're also on Twitter. Here, very quickly, is our homepage, and I want to just point you to this button and let you know that today we've set up a special membership join or renew code of metadata that would entitle you to a 20% discount off of membership. And as a last aside, you can also, as a member, receive a discount on any purchase of photo mechanic software, which David is going to discuss later in the webinar. So without further ado, let me get to David and sit back in the background. David, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Sam. I guess I should put on my tent revival voice since this is the big tent organization.
There you go. Thank you.
I'm assuming most of you who have joined us are either managing an image archive or maybe creating images that are going into an archive, or maybe you're dealing with images that you get from an archive or stock distributor. Photo researchers, I know these are the kind of the core constituency of ASPP, although I'm sure we have many other people who have joined us. So if any of you are out there that are doing something different, use the comment box and let Sarah know, and that info will get passed on to me. And if there's anything that I need to address that's kind of outside of that, then we can deal with that. So first, let's just take a step back and want to think a little bit about the importance that words play for the images that we create, because images are, you know, the universal language, but by the same token, if you don't have words that tell you what's going on in there, they're can sometimes be a little obtuse. So if we're looking at this image here on screen, you know, what's going on here? One of my favorite expressions was one I'd heard from a photographer at the San Antonio Express a few years ago, who remarked that putting an image into their system without having any information tied to it was like chucking it into a black hole, because you were never going to see it again. So let's keep that in mind here. So if we look at this example, what value does this photo have just by itself, for whether it's for cultural or commercial purposes? What if we don't know who the person is and we don't know what they're doing, let alone when it was taken or where? What use is it? Now, if I told you that this woman's name was Eleonora Fagan, and she has a dog, we can tell that, and was photographed by William Gottlieb in 1946, does that help any?
Not so much.
Nope. When you hit the next button, I thought it had gone forward. Sam?
Yes.
We hit the next?
Yep. There we go.
There we go. Okay, there's the dog. Okay. So, and give that a certain respect and time there, but we'll flip forward to the next one now. And what if you knew that she was a singer and happened to work at the club Downbeat? Does that help any? This image is getting a little closer to an iconic one that I think a lot of people will probably recognize. So if we flip to the next one.
There she is.
Lady Day in her glory. And anybody who knows her or has heard her sing knows her importance in the jazz world, and so those images certainly have significance. And if we didn't know that that was her in those earlier ones, you know, somebody might get a box of those and say, oh, you know, who's this woman with the African mask? You know, just chuck it out. We don't need that anymore. And that image is gone, and we've lost it forever.
So what you're saying is that the image works for us if we bring our knowledge to the picture as viewers. But I think where you're going to go is that if we put information into the picture, then everybody can have at least a minimal or an operating understanding of what the picture is and what it might mean.
Exactly. I mean, in the old days, you know, you'd write on the back of the print, but with the digital file, there is no back. So there is an inside, and you can put stuff inside of it, and it'll travel along with it, which is what we're kind of talking about today. So some of the things we're going to talk about is how to both find and preserve digital images, and my background is much more on the findability part, but just because I deal with other people with archives, I've learned over time that it's really important to also take care of your files and to check up on them frequently, and you know, if you change software, to make sure you test stuff before you just willy-nilly go and start doing a bunch of stuff and then find find out later you've just corrupted a whole hard drive worth of files. So, with that in mind...
Let's talk about these best practice archiving techniques, David.
Well, there's 3 listed up there, and we're going to kind of go through these in order. I kind of tend to lump naming files properly as both a external file, the label that's stuck on the outside of the box, so to speak, as well as the information that you tuck into it. Some people will store these externally. There's pluses and minuses to that as well. There's also some stuff we'll talk about in terms of pre-flighting, where you can, if you're dealing with lots of images, being able to do it in a batch operation can save you an incredible amount of time.
And we've got a really interesting tool that does just that we'll show later on in the presentation.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about metadata. Now, this is not the metadata that you're hearing in the news all the time. We really aren't having anything to do with the NSA here. What we're talking about is information that is tied to the image that can help us find it later. Things like captions and keywords, but also geographic information like city, state, and country where the picture is being shown in the image. Also near and dear to my heart is attribution, if you want to be properly credited. I don't know how many of you may have seen the picture that was floating around. It was a big viral sensation about a week and a half ago called The Piano Player of Kiev, where there's this guy tapping away on a computer and there's the big line of stormtrooper folks behind them. That was kind of an interesting photo, but nobody seemed to, at first, to know where it came from. A friend of mine, David Sanger, actually spent a couple of hours tracking it down, and he put a little blog post up about it that'll show up. Actually, we should mention right now, we've got a whole bunch of links that we'll be mentioning here, and those are going to go up somewhere where you guys can get to them so that you don't have to, read long URLs here as we go along. So, but
I should point out that this is the kind of information that is really, really valuable to communicate between a picture provider and somebody who receives a picture. Example, picture researchers, photo editors typically handle thousands of files. And if you're in the commercial photography world, you want your pictures to be findable by those people, not just on the website, but also once that file arrives on their desktop. And metadata is the way to make sure that it's findable by the picture buyer, by the photo researcher.
And those that follow this closely may be aware of a lawsuit that just got settled recently between Getty, AFP, and a photographer down in Haiti. So that kind of illustrates that point.
Right.
So,
but converting from the FPO image to the order to the purchased image, metadata is one. It's just a small element that can help you get there, and
yeah.
it's a great element that the photo researcher or the picture editor can use to add his or her own metadata to the image file so that it could be associated with the job.
Correct, yeah, and I mean caption information can really, it can make the difference in making a sale if somebody can find that bit of information that tells them this is the image that we need. So with that, we'll head on here. I did want to mention one thing, the little Kurt Vonnegut quote is one that always sticks with me because everybody, they love metadata unless they have to be the one that has to enter it. Because that gets into the whole maintenance thing. So looking at file names, this is just, picture of a folder that you might see on some photo researcher's desktop. And do we have any idea where these came from? Probably not. I mean, the closest one might be the one at the bottom where we've got that A45649, because that kind of looks like it might actually be an archive file name, and maybe the picture researcher is just stuck in front of it, tree frog. And I will, from my perspective, this is, if you're going to change the file name, and clients will, try to encourage them to do it this way. Leave what's there, tack on maybe something at the beginning or at the end, but leave that base file name there, because without that, sometimes with a lot of archives, it may be really hard to find that thing later.
That's a great tip for photo researchers and editors as well. If you leave that root information, that number or that code, then you'll be able to find the image when the image supplier gives you that code and says that's our image.
Yeah, there's one technique I'll talk about a little later is basically there are ways that you can automate yanking that file name and sticking it into the metadata, because people don't know how to modify that one as much. So that tends to be a good way to handle it. So now let's talk a little bit about what we can do with this metadata stuff. One thing that I try when I've been talking with people, it seems that this is a good illustration using this bento box, because to most people it's just, you know, a digital file is just this lump, and you know, when you say, and it's a black hole, yeah, and you know, you're trying to say, well, you just, you know, tuck that into the metadata, and they're trying to conceptualize it. So if we open up that bento box, we can note that it's not just one big box. It's a bunch of little smaller boxes inside. Now, the biggest one is the pixel stream itself, but there is typically what people will call the header of the file, and in that header can be all kinds of information. And if we flip forward to the next one here, we will see that there are indeed, whoops, nope, not that far. We got the one with all the names there. There we go. So we can see there's these, you know, alphabet soup sort of things there. Some of these even have sub-boxes, so you notice that little tiny GPS one. So GPS information gets tucked inside of the EXIF container, so to speak. And the the most important ones for us, though, are XMP, and for a lot of the software we're still using, it uses this legacy IPTC. The official name is the Information Interchange Model, or IIM, as a lot of people just call it IPTC IIM. So if you hear them flinging that around, that's what they're talking about. I usually just use legacy because it sounds better, or it's easier to understand.
And it's visible in virtually all software that addresses images on the desktop, and certainly all professional software.
Yeah, and any of the better professional software now, if something comes in that only has this legacy form, it can read that no problem. If it has the older form and this newer form, it'll do a little dance and try to figure out which one is the most recent. So they're usually fine. Sometimes you can run into problems with some of the newer software may only write this newer form, and then if you bring it into an older application, it may say, well, there isn't anything here. And it may be, it doesn't know where to look for it. So that can be a problem. So let's flip forward to the next one here and talk about the importance of file names. If we think back to that folder with the frog names, you know, like we said, if you know clients that routinely rename the files, well, what can you do? Well, you can bury that inside of the file. The most popular place of putting this is the title field, or sometimes it's called document title, or as you can see in the next slide, in Photo Mechanic, they've just changed this recently in version 5, but they use the older lingo and call it object name. So if these get you confused, there is a full list of file names and their alter egos that I have listed on the Photo Metadata site. So you can go in there, it's all alphabetized, and if you're trying to figure out which field to use, it gives you a definition of what you would normally put in that field, and if it's kind of the not so preferred name, it'll mention that, you know, this is the old way of referring to it, you should really use the new one. So that information is also in the back of, there's a guidebook called the IPTC User's Guide that I authored for the IPTC a few years back, and we updated it more recently with both this IPTC core, and there's a whole new set of fields that have been added in called IPTC extension, which are just now starting to get into some of the bigger software packages. So let's see now.
Let's move to captions and
Yep.
talk about the importance of caption information. Then I've gotten a question on our Twitter stream, David, that I wanted
Uh-huh.
to post in your direction. How can clients quickly track an image back to you if you're a picture provider?
Well, most cases, if you're dealing with embedded information, the best field to use for that is there's typically a source field as well as a credit field, or even the copyright notice. The newer IPTC core has a whole set of fields that are called creator contact info, and that has like your name and whatever information you want to include. You can include very fine-grained, email address, phone number, street address, city, state, country, phone number, just about anything. You don't have to include all of it, but if you want to put your phone number and an email address, you can do that, and it's right there in the file.
And in the case of the Macintosh will search that information directly. If the file is on your disk, the Macintosh search system finds it and tells you where it is.
You can use Spotlight for a lot of that, or if you have the file there right open, we'll get into that in some of the software applications here about how you can access that.
Another quick question before we move forward, David. What's the difference between caption and headline, and how should each be used?
Well, it's a good question. Actually, the people get those. Actually, the headline, title, and caption, or as it's now normally referred to, description, tend to get flipped around quite a bit. What I usually tell people is, remember that the organization that was developing this comes from a newspaper background. So if you're looking at a newspaper, what is the short, pithy line that tells you what's going on in the story? That's the headline. The caption or the description is more like the story. So it can be longer. Typically, you want the headline to be shorter. And people that are artists will often see the title and think, oh, well, I'll do this like the title of a painting that would be hanging on it next to the wall. Whereas the title in the IPTC lingo, really, that older name, the object name, sometimes gives a better idea of how that field is more typically used, because that's typically where you put the name of the actual entity, that object that you have, so that you'll know where to find it later or how to search for it.
Terrific. Okay, so let's move on to caption. Well, we've actually pretty much covered caption.
A little bit. There's one illustration I wanted to bring up. Usually I tell people that when you're trying to find an image, two fields are really key. The caption field or description field, and I just kind of gave away the other one, keyword field. So if we talk about those, one thing, there was a couple of years ago, I was at an ASPP panel discussion, I think it was in Arlington, Virginia, and they had a woman there from the National Geographic Traveler, and she was telling us this fascinating story about how she had spent months trying to find this photo showing a particular gate around the Forbidden City in China. She checked their preferred stock vendors, and they had lots of pictures of the Forbidden City and lots of gates, but none of them had the name of the gates. And each of the gates around the Forbidden City have like different names. And the story was talking about a particular gate, and she was a very diligent researcher trying to find that particular gate. What finally did it for her was she stumbled across a link in a search that led her to a picture on Flickr, and so she was able to use that as a reference image, and was by saying, okay, this is the gate I'm looking for, and then she had to look through all the other pictures trying to find the picture that had the gate that matched up to that. I don't know if nowadays with the Flickr or with the Google image search whether that would speed up the process or not, but this was probably back in 2007 or something like that, there just wasn't an easy way to do it. So looking at this image, a lot of people will think that it was taken in Japan, but it's not. If we flip forward to the next, I've got some of the metadata there. You can see the headline, which is short, and the caption, which is longer, which tells us that it was actually taken in Louisiana, and it kind of looks a little weird because it's black and white infrared. If you ever get there, it's a fascinating garden because they have like 7 or 8 different things, and it goes from like an English to a Moorish to a Japanese garden, and you just kind of like walk through a hedge and it's completely changed. It's really fascinating. Anyway, so let's move on here. One thing, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. We were talking about storing the information in the image or outside of the image. There's been a little bit of talk about registries on various forums that I participate in. The one thing that I always kind of find interesting is a lot of people get into this, well, it should be here or it should be there, and they think of it as an or question, where I think it's really better thought of as an and statement. So, you should store the information in the file, and you should store it in a registry, because that just multiplies the ways that people can find you. Actually, the Plus registry, one of the things that it has built into it is there's an image lookup feature, so that even if somebody did find an image and it had been stripped of its metadata, you could actually go there, upload just like through the Google image search, and if it had that image in the registry, it would be able to connect you to whoever has the copyright is handling the copyright for it. So one way to kind of move forward with that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In my workflow, David, where I'm working with, say, 1,000 or 5,000 images for a client, I will have embedded data in the file itself, and I will have all of the metadata fields also listed in a spreadsheet with field titles across the top. Then when I send the 5,000 pictures out to distribution or to another stock agency, the image data travels with the pictures inside the metadata, and it travels in the spreadsheet, which can be immediately imported into their database driving the website.
Yeah, and depending on the distributor, some of them will prefer to have it in a spreadsheet, some of them will prefer to have it in the images, and it's, I don't know if it's half and half right now. It depends a lot on who you're dealing with. So it's good to be able to deal with both of those, and there are tools to take a whole mess of files and extract that information that's already embedded in them, and there are ways to turn around and move that back into the files as well.
Okay, what's up with this image, David?
Well, it's about juggling. A lot of stuff that it's a great, it was just one of those fun images that I had, and I had to figure out a way to stick it in here. So we've seen how the names and metadata can be useful archiving techniques, and there's another facet of this that kind of more has to do with quality control and automation. So there are some tools that are out there now that can actually help remove the drudgery of checking hundreds or thousands of files, because I know this is one of those things that people that are managing image collections will have to go ahead and take all of these images and check to make sure that they have the right height and width, and that they're in the right color space, and that they've got whatever fields that they're going to need filled out. So if we flip forward to the next one here, this is a screen showing one option that's out there right now. This is from 2020 software, and this is a beta version, so it may not look exactly like this, but they've got this pre-flight software called image export, and you can point it at a folder of images. There's some switches that you can checkbox what you want it to check, set your specifications, and let it run. And then at the end of that, you will get a report. You'll get a report that looks something like this, and if something doesn't meet the specs, then it'll flash up in red, and then you got to go back and check that. There's also Capture Limited has a piece of software called Greenlight, works in a similar way. Drag and drop a folder of images onto this app, and it already has the specs set up for the particular distributor, and it'll tell you whether or not they all meet the requirements, and if it rejects them, it'll tell you which ones. And this is very handy because you don't want photographers FTPing up a bunch of images and then finding, oh well, these 15 you got to redo because you've just spent all that time uploading them. Much better to go ahead, run it through this pre-flight tool, say these have passed, and then you can forward them.
So this is a great tool for large submission processing, and if you're submitting images to Getty or to Alamy or any of the large stock photo agencies, they have their requirements for where they want their metadata and how they want their metadata entered, and you can set up the rules for that metadata and then run your entire submission against this application or an application like it and determine you're good to go or you've got some more work to do.
Yeah, there's a fellow by the name of Graham Cookson in the UK. He's a absolute whiz with JavaScripting for Photoshop, and he's actually created a little checker for Adobe Bridge as well that can be configured for just about anything you can think of, and it will generate reports or flip up and tell you which images you need to go back and add a caption to or add keywords or whatever that's been forgotten. So.
All right, let's move on and talk about verifying for those of us who do work with lots and lots and lots of pictures. Let's touch on this really, really quickly because this is a very technical point and I don't want people's hair to hurt.
Yeah, well, what I was going to do is mostly send them out. There's a longer article that I have on my website called The Trouble Transporting Tribbles, just to get your alliterations in there. And it explains how you can use this thing called checksums to go ahead and... There we go. Okay. It talks about this concept called checksums, which basically... The analogy I use is it's kind of like a little DNA fingerprint for each file. Each one has a different unique number that can be generated for it, and if anything changes in the file, I mean literally you even go in, remove a red eye in the pixels, or you change something in the metadata, when you create a new checksum it's not the same as the other one, and so it'll say it's failed. Now sometimes it can be something that simple, other times it can be literally bit rot where the image is falling apart. There was a cable that was not connected properly and the image looks like it was on the other server, but it really isn't. And you want to catch that as early as possible while you still have your other backups that you can access. So checksums are important, but they're one of those things that's another mind-numbing drudgery that nobody wants to do. So one of the things I was going to mention is there's a group, they're actually more involved with audio-visual video and audio files, but they are in New York called AV Preserve. And if we flip forward to the next one here, you can see a little, they've got a beta out now of something called Fixity. And basically this works kind of like your pre-flight to a certain extent. You set it and forget it, and it'll generate a little report. You can run it monthly, weekly, daily, point it at a set of folders. It creates these checksums, and then it'll go back once a week, once a day, whatever, check them, do all that drudgery for you. And if there's problems, it'll pop up a little failure in the report, and then you know which ones to go check.
Sweet tool, David.
And it's free.
And it's free.
Yeah, can't beat that.
And there are a number of free tools that we want to touch on today.
What a perfect segue.
Thank you. We've already talked about how Spotlight, the find icon up at the top of the Macintosh screen, honors metadata. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking for an image file and you know who it's from, or you know the caption, or you know the headline, you can find the file pretty quickly on the Mac, and you can open it in preview. You can also do a get info off of the file and see the metadata. There's also a bunch of tools in Windows, and I think I think we should skip over these tools for now because we're going to show most of them.
Yeah,
aren't we, David?
yeah. The only one you might want to say, if anybody wants to write down that URL, it'll be in the other thing as well. But this online EXIF tool is a very handy little thing, especially for photo researchers, because any image you see on the web, you can very quickly have it check whether or not there's any metadata in it. So it can be very handy. So if we flip forward, that was a picture in case we wanted to have something to look at other than a bunch of words. But free is always good. And now, the one thing I will point out as we flip through these is I'll try to point out some of the limitations that you run into. I'm making the assumption that most people here are going to be dealing with primarily TIFFs and JPEGs. Some of these tools work a lot better with JPEGs than they do with TIFF files. Once you start getting into PSD and RAW files, then things get a lot more complicated. But JPEGs are pretty uniform at this point. Here we're looking at the Apple Finder and the Get Info, and you can see that between whether it's a TIFF or a JPEG on the right and left, they're pretty close. I mean, the order that they appear, and you get to see a little bit more in the TIFF, you get to see what camera it came from, and you don't necessarily see that right off the bat in the JPEG. But you know, your captions there, your keywords are there, a little bit of special instructions info. So I've got the actual plus registry number for the image showing up, but you know, roughly analogous.
Love the Mac. Just love the Mac. Here's what it looks like in preview, right?
Which is, yeah, there's a little bit more of a difference, I think, between them. Plus, it's a little harder to dig into it because you've got to first have the image opened in preview, then you either got to dig through the menu, or you can do a get info. So if you're a keyboard person, the Command I will get you there pretty quick. But then you got to flip over to the right tab because it usually drops you into the general one off the bat. So you got to know to click over to the IPTC tab there.
Right, here we are, and we're looking at the TIFF file now.
Right, and if you flip over to that one, you'll see it's a little different, but again, most of the basic information is there. The only thing I have a problem with this one is when you have long things, you know, if you got a caption more than like 20 or 30 characters, it just kind of dots there at the end, and if you want to see the rest of that, you've got to generally go digging a little bit deeper into
But for a
the
picture buyer or a photo researcher, this is perfect because it confirms to you this picture is either the one you're looking for or it's not the one you're looking for.
And that is sometimes all you need to know. Or even whether, you know, if you're trying to find where it came from, that's usually short enough it's not going to get truncated. So the other one I was mentioning, if we flip forward here to the EXIF tool online, Jeffrey Friedel basically there's a command line tool that we'll talk about a little bit later, but he basically took this and made it so that it'll work online, and what's great is it works in virtually any browser, and on some of them, like Firefox and Safari, you can even install a little bookmarklet so that when you have an image that's the primary thing on the screen, you just click that in your toolbar, and it will grab the URL and flip you over to this tool and give you this long page of stuff, which we're just seeing the top of it here. This is the summary information, and if we flip down one more to the next slide, we will see not just the summary stuff, but we will see that it goes down to, in detail, here's just the XMP information, and it actually is longer than what I can actually fit on screen here, but I wanted to make the words large enough so that we could see. And then you go down a little bit further, and it will even show you the IPTC. So this, I use this oftentimes as a digital forensic tool because there are some issues where you get stuff out of sync where software is both writing to IPTC and XMP, and some only writes to the older IPTC, and you know, somebody says, well, I added all these captions and they're not showing up in Bridge. What's wrong? And you can sometimes look into here and see, are they different? Are they not? So that can be, it can be a very handy tool for that. And lest you think that this is only for online images, you can also point to an image that's on your local drive or network as well. The only limit there is if you don't have a really fast connection, sometimes it'll choke on, you know, if you're trying to send it a 5 meg TIFF file, it may not ever respond. So that's where you need the desktop applications.
Okay, I think then that we're into the 5 world-class tools for working on metadata, are we not? As we start Picasa?
Well, Picasa, I wouldn't call it a world-class tool. The one thing I would say though is it's ubiquitous, and what's great is it's free. It's from Google, and it'll run on Mac, Windows, or even Linux. And you can see an awful lot of data. It's great for viewing data. It's better again with JPEGs, kind of like Apple Preview and whatnot, where you can see a lot of basic metadata. If we flip to the next one, we'll see not only is it giving us the little properties and everything else like that, but it goes even further down. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, there's a little blue I button, which is what we've pressed to get that right-hand column to appear. And with the JPEGs, you get a bunch of different stuff. If you flip over to the TIFF version, not so much, not as friendly. The way this works, like a lot of other applications, is you double-click on a thumbnail, and we flip to the next one. We can see that preview, and now you're noticing right below the image it says make a caption. Well, that should actually have some words there. It should actually have the caption, but because it's a TIFF file, it doesn't know how to access them. And likewise, you also can't update or add information if it's a TIFF file. Now, if it's JPEG, and you go to the next one, whoops, you're one ahead of me.
Yeah, I'm ahead of you. Here you go.
If you flip to that JPEG version, there you can actually type in and change the caption or add to it. You can also add what they call tags, which are essentially keywords. And this is the most important thing. When you do that, it is actually written back to that file immediately. So if you grab some files down from someplace and all you have is Picasa, and you have a URL from where it came from, you can actually copy and paste that into the caption, and then you'll be able to remember where it came from. Not a lot of the other applications we've looked at so far give you that option. Now, if we flip forward, IrfanView has been around a long time now. The one limitation with IrfanView is that it is the older legacy format only, but it has an awful lot of things behind it. Just flip through very quickly here. We've got several different tabs. The main ones are the description tab, which gives us a lot of very basic information, our caption, our title, the document title, that object name again. If we flip forward, it's got the full keyword stuff. It's also got some older stuff in there with categories that really aren't used a whole lot anymore. And then if you flip forward to the credit tab, we've also got the date it was created in the city, state, location, that kind of stuff, so you can know where it was taken. And I know, Sam, you've used this before for a lot of things for batch processing images in sets of folders, and that's one of the places where it really shines. Absolutely.
This can take 5,000 image files that are in a whole slew of folders and subfolders, high-res files, and spit out a series of low-res proxies to a different location on the disk drive and recreate all the folders that the high-res are in. So it builds the entire hierarchy of files and folders as well. This is really a terrific.
And that's one of the few tools I know of that can do that. So even though it's somewhat limited in it, it's a little older form of metadata, it's still, it has its place. Now, the 5 great tools. Well, we'll count. I think we've got 5, but we may have more.
I think we have more. I think
probably more. Well, that's that joke about people that are binary, right? Anyway, so
right, let's talk about Bridge and Photoshop, because those are the real ubiquitous tools.
Why don't we flip forward so we can see just now, Bridge is one of those things that's kind of interesting because it's got lots of different ways of looking at the same stuff. You've got different views. Right now we're looking at this Essentials view, which I like because you can see the image a little better, but the problem is you only see the data for one at a time. If you flip forward to the next, although you get to see a lot of different stuff. There's that Metadata Focus where you can see the metadata for multiple images all at one time, and they're in columns, which is kind of handy. You can also see deeper in for the one that you're looking at, but just being able to see that all there, especially if you have a big monitor, it can be very useful. But the really cool thing is in Bridge, you can go and you can turn off or turn on which fields you want to see and which ones you don't want to see. So that's something that's very handy. If you're just focusing on just a handful of fields, you can kind of hide the rest of it so that you don't have to look at that, or makes a shorter area so that you're not having to scroll all the time. Now, if you want even more metadata, there is this thing called the IPTC Plus panel. This was a collaborative effort, and Graham Cookson did the coding on this. But what's great about this is if you've got Photoshop CS5, well, you've got access to the IPTC core and this IPTC extension, and the extension stuff from a stock perspective is really nice because you've got the option now to put in model release information and maybe a link to or the actual model release number, property release stuff, models in the image, and lots of other things like that. People that are working in cultural heritage, it's got things for artwork and everything as well. So that can be very handy, but you've got to have CS5 or CS6 or something like that, and I know a lot of places, they're still using Bridge for CS3. Well, you can install this, and this will give you access to all that stuff even on Bridge for CS3. So if you don't have a huge budget, this is a great way without having to upgrade to the latest to get to it. The other thing too, flip forward, yeah, you've got the custom up there. This taps into the plus system as well, so you've got the full set of plus fields, and one of those things is there's 10 custom fields that you can use to bury information in without having to create your own panel for adding this information. It won't necessarily have the field name that you may want, but at least you can, if you all agree within your organization that custom 1 equals whatever bit of information, you can embed that into your files. So the gold standard Photoshop file info is what most people end up measuring everything else from to make sure it's compatible, and I am one of them. One thing that I find most interesting about file info is that there's an awful lot of people who think that this is the standard. Well, what they may not realize is that this is actually kind of conglomerating a bunch of different standards together, because you've got the camera data that's coming from EXIF, you've got IPTC, you've got Photoshop info, and depending on what file formats you're working with, you can even get audio and video file information as well.
David, this is a really good point at which to ask the question, which of these are the must-have fields?
Well, the thing is, there's not a simple answer to that because it depends on what you're doing. What I would say is, if we say stock, that's one thing. If you say cultural heritage, there may be some different fields. But by and large, I would say if you're sending images out into the world, I consider it a bare minimum to have at least a bare bones caption, at least a couple of keywords to make sure your file name is in the file, make sure that whoever created the file is there, your copyright notice is there, and
okay, so you mean document title, description, keywords, copyright status, and notice.
Well, the copyright notice especially, the copyright status is something that is a specific to Adobe only. So, I mean, if you go over to Adobe Aperture, you're not going to see that as an option, but, the main thing is the copyright notice.
And also perhaps the copyright or the credit notice.
Credit, yes, credit
they are two different
and source if it's different. Some of the times you have instances where somebody may own the copyright, but they've licensed it, given somebody exclusive agreement to take care of all of the managing of the sales and everything of that image. So they may be the source you need to go to. Photoshop is definitely one of the things. Personally, I spend a lot more of my time though in Photo Mechanic. There's many reasons for that, probably too numerous to count, but one of the things that I really love is when I'm adding information to a folder full of images, I can just run my mouse over these thumbnails and it will pop up this little hover screen, and you can configure, say, these are the things I want to show up, so I can see, does that have GPS information in it? is this in the right color space? You know, how big is this file? Did I remember to put the keywords in there? Did I remember to put the caption in there? And just very quickly, I don't have to open up each of them to see that. I can just hover. Just run the mouse over it, and there they are.
This stationary pad, though, this looks somewhat daunting, David.
Well, it is until you see that little lightning bolt down in the corner, because what's great about it is this is your template creator. Just like in Bridge, you can batch things by creating a template, and basically you create the template once, and then you access it. So the reason they call it stationary is just like, you know, in the old days with stationery and letterhead, you know, you had the basic information already in there. So I have a stationary pad that, you know, if I plug that in, it fills in pretty much every field except for the captions and keywords. And then I, you know, go ahead and, you know, I'll double check, you know, make sure that the city and location, stuff like that are correct. But it's not as much work as you would think.
So you're telling me that this monster can basically do most of my work for me once I've set up the template.
Well, and there's other things too. One of the really cool things about Photomechanic is it's a token-based system. So if down in it's just a little below this, you can't see it here, but in that document title field, I can actually put in a little curly Q and put file name base and, you know, the curly brace, and that's all I have to do. I don't have to do anything else. When I hit apply stationary, it goes through and it grabs the actual file name on it, stuffs it in that. And there's a whole list of variables. I mean, if you wanted to, you know, put your f-stop and shutter speed or your date, you can just automatically, you know, put that little token in there and fill it in. Sports photographers are real aficionados of Photomechanic because you can take a text file that has like the numbers for all of the players on the teams that you're photographing, and as you're making your captions, all you have to do is look at the picture and say, oh, it's number 33 on the Bears, and just put Bears, you know, number sign 33, and it will fill in the full name of the player from that text file that you've already loaded in there. So you don't have to worry about spelling their names right. All you got to do is be able to note which number it is, which can save a heck of a lot of time.
So here's the IPTC info in Photomechanic.
And I filled this one in. This is just pulling that same image that we've been using throughout, so you can see what things are there. Obviously, there are no people in this picture, so I'm not using the person shown. You know, again, with a lot of fields in metadata, people look at it and say, oh, I have to fill out all of these. Well, not necessarily. And actually, that's if we flip to the well, you can scroll down, you can see this is a long line on the left-hand side of things that you can fill in if you wanted to fill them in. A lot of times it's more for checking stuff, but if we go to the next screen, you'll see that you can actually modify this. So you can actually turn on, does this field show up, does it not, and even change the order of them if you want to.
Pretty similar to Bridge.
Yeah, yeah. So,
and it's also fair to point out that Bridge and Photoshop both also have templates. So you can pre-populate most of your information into a template and then fill in the customized information that's particular to the image that you're looking at.
And that's one of the big things. Now, the one limitation with Bridge is it really doesn't have a token-based system like Photomechanic does. However, it does have JavaScript scripting, and you can actually, there is a script for Bridge that will do that file name to title thing. So it'll grab the file name, stuff it into the title, and you can just run that on a whole batch of images rather than having to manually type it in or cut and paste.
Bridge, however, doesn't support map browsing.
No, and that's one thing that Photomechanic really does a great job of. If there's GPS already in it, you can just right-click on the image and say Show Map, and then you get this screen like we're seeing here, which is really cool. And if it's not there, there's another screen you can go into and you can actually pin it. The only hard part there is that you actually have to like drill down to wherever it was that you were to begin with. However, there is a default setting, so if you're mostly taking stuff within a couple miles, 20 miles of your house, you can set your default position to be your home place, and then the map will always zoom in right there.
Okay, David, let me ask you a question at this point. If I'm a picture researcher or an editor, Where do you suggest that I plug some metadata, maybe a client name or a project name, a job name? How do you suggest that we add that information to a local copy or an FPO?
Are you talking about which fields?
Yes.
Okay. The best thing that I usually point people towards is again, there's that IPTC users guide that I created. Now, if you don't want to download the PDF and read through that, the next best thing is on the photo metadata site. There's a section under the, I have to look it up here myself, but it's under one of the top tabs there. There's a thing called the metadata field guide, kind of like Peterson's Guide to the Birds, you know. But it's an alphabetized list of every single field and basically how to use it. It covers both IPTC core and IPTC extension. So any of the fields, if you're not sure what goes in there, there's the place to check it. You know, so if you're confused about, well, do I put them in the source or the credit, it's all explained there.
While we're here, another question about metadata that comes off of the Twitter stream. Remember, our hashtag is ASPP webinar. And the question is, okay, so I've got my metadata into my pictures. Am I the only one that can change it? No. What about what's happening with security and my metadata? What's happening with social networks and my metadata?
Oh boy, you're opening a whole can of worms, aren't you? I mean, that's one of the, I can remember, gee, I think it was probably 2004, 2005, and a fellow from Adobe, Gunnar Pennicus, had brought this up, the whole security, you know, can I lock my metadata? And actually, I wrote a whole article that's on it's on the Dan Coalition website if anybody's interested in looking it up. But the basic answer is, you know, if you can put it in there, somebody else can wipe it out. You know, now there are laws against that, as that whole Getty AFP and Daniel Merrell case just proved. Yeah, if somebody comes along and says, "Oh, I like these images," I'll yank all the information out, claim them as mine, and put them up there for sale. You know, some people may fall for that and go ahead and use them, but you know, that person that pulled those out, that was, you know, that's against the law, and they can end up paying for that, and other people along the way can end up paying for it.
Right, so the short answer is there's no way to protect your metadata.
There's no technical way of easily blocking it. The closest you can get is it is possible to save an image as a PDF file and to use the what are they? The
security features.
The document locking within that. However, once you do that, the thing is, in order for anybody to really use it, you need to give them the code so that they can either print it or copy it. And once they have that, it's basically open season. So, you know, you can lock it up temporarily that way, but even with that, I know there are ways to hack that. There are PDF cracker things that are out there that'll allow you to break open a PDF. So, you know, it's not secure.
Or you could just upload it to Facebook.
Well, that'll strip everything from it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Actually, there's the IPTC, one of the links that's in that list that I had given you is the embeddedmetadata.org website. I was instrumental in helping IPTC put that together. It's kind of a continuation of something that I had started a few years ago called the Metadata Manifesto, and we kind of narrowed it down to the Embedded Metadata Manifesto, but basically we as part of that, we did a survey of kind of the top social networking sites, and it's not pretty. So basically, you know, if you're thinking of using, you know, Facebook as your image repository, you will be in sad shape when, you know, your hard drive crashes and you think, oh, well, I'll just go to Facebook and download all of those images, and literally it does not even have the date that the image was originally created. So if you even wanted to like sort them in chronological order, you can't do it.
And I believe they recompress the files.
Yeah, because they do. They pull out the actual sRGB ICC profile and replace it with their own tiny sRGB.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, they obviously know that it's there, and they know enough to remove it. Exactly why they are doing it, I've yet to hear an explanation from them.
It may have something to do with the billions and billions of photos that they're storing. All those bits for the ICC profile or for IPTC metadata really add up.
Yeah.
And
well, it goes to prove that whole adage of, if you're not paying for the service, you're the product.
David, before we move forward into EXIF tool, a number of people have asked us about Adobe Lightroom, and it's fair to say that certainly the most important metadata fields, i.e. copyright notice, the caption, the keywords, the file name for the title, all of those are available in Adobe Lightroom as well as Photoshop or Bridge.
And you can do... Right, and you can use templates within Lightroom as well. I mean, really, somebody had said this a long time ago, but in a sense, Lightroom is kind of a souped-up Adobe Camera Raw on steroids married to Bridge.
With a little bit of Photo Mechanic thrown in. When I import pictures into Lightroom, I rename the root file. I strip off the letter at the beginning of the file name that the camera gives me, add a date, and I import or immediately ingest into the DNG file my copyright information, some basic keywords, some basic caption information from the shoot. And then I walk away from the computer for a while Lightroom generates my previews, and when it's done generating the previews, select them all, save the files, and Lightroom pushes all of the metadata that it stores in its own private database. It pushes that back into the DNGs or the TIFFs or the JPEG files. So that's how you can use Adobe Lightroom to do the same thing that we've been talking about in Photo Mechanic, Picasa, Bridge, and OrphanView.
Oh yeah, and for the program that it is, it's a steal in terms of cost, because it's still under, I believe it's under $200. It may even be $150 now. So I mean, you can't go wrong with that. For a lot of photo researchers, though, it may be a bit more interface than they want to deal with if they're only, photo researchers, if they're dealing with, folders full of images, it may be a bit much. But right. There are certainly advantages to it if you're willing to invest the time to learn how it can help you. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. If you've never used Photoshop or Lightroom, if you're going to start off, I'd probably say now go to Lightroom, because it's certainly a lot more affordable.
Since we're talking about those alternatives, what would you suggest for a non-technical picture researcher?
Well, part of it depends on if they need to have batching capabilities, because that's typically where most of the, Picasas and OrphanViews and things like that. Well, OrphanView can do some batching as well. Like the very simple tools. A lot of it comes down to, do I just need to be able to read the information that's in there, or do I need to be able to add stuff to it? And if you only need to be able to read it, any of those ones we mentioned earlier on a one-off can be fine. I mean, whether it's in the Mac Finder or OrphanView or even Picasa, I mean, you can see pretty much anything that's in there. It's when you need to add information, that's usually when the rubber meets the road.
Right.
And if you got even a few bucks, there are a number of things out there that are quite useful. I mean, on the Windows side, another one beyond OrphanView that's actually worth a look is, it's kind of a misnomer. It's called GeoSetter, and its main thing is to deal with adding GPS information to images from track logs and other things like that. But it has a full set of IPTC metadata, and it uses EXIF tool in the background actually to write the information. So it's fully capable of writing both the XMP and this older legacy form, and it's free.
Since you mentioned EXIF tool, perhaps we should now wade out into the deep water.
Yeah, well, the one thing before we get there, actually two things. We talked about the social media stripping. The one thing we probably should mention, since PhotoShelter is so gracious to give us this time, is that they actually are very, very diligent about metadata, and they can read in stuff, and they're, it will not overwrite your file unless you want them to do that. It is an option, but they do a pretty good job of it. And actually, to be honest, most of the pay for services do a much better job. It's those ones that you're getting for free you got to be careful of. The other thing is there's this file data script for Bridge. And there's another tool that's out there too. I did not grab a screenshot of, but it's called the Emmet. It's the embedded metadata extraction tool that the folks at ArtStore put together. If you need to suck out a bunch of information out of a bunch of images, like you said, there are some places that they want you to send the images and a spreadsheet. Emmet can pull all that information out. You can also do it with this file data. And you can do it with XFTool. Now, the one thing here is you can also export this file data out into what's called a CSV file, and then you can bring it back in, a plain text file.
Sorry, let me push that back to the file data screen so that we can see what you're talking
Well,
about.
you've got options here on the types of metadata that you want to send out. So you can do just what's in the Photoshop file info, the IPTC core extension, or even this Visual Research Association metadata. They have a custom Photoshop panel as well that has a bunch of very deep stuff for paintings and drawings and other artworks. So with this, you can pull the information out, you can put it into a spreadsheet, you can modify it, and then you can pull it back in. It's a similar similar to how the IPTC Plus panel works, except that this thing is designed to work with like tens of thousands of files.
We actually got a question on the Twitter stream about 1,000 files that need descriptions or captions. And the question is, what's the best tool to use? Well, this is one way to do it. If you've got 1,000 files, you can export the data into a CSV, edit the CSV data using a search and replace in Excel, and then boom, import that data back into the picture files, and you've just edited the metadata for 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 files. You can also do the same thing, with the other tools, particularly the Plus panel or the VRA panel.
Yeah, and actually one of my favorite tools to do this now that I've written up, there's an article on my website that's in that list of links that'll go out, but you can use PhotoMechanic to basically take the information in a plain text file. I show specifically how to do it, where if you've sent off images for keywording and what you get back from the keyworder is a spreadsheet, right. It shows you very easily how to do that, and I've done it. I did it as a demo at PhotoPlus a couple of years back, and had a couple hundred gigabytes of stuff, and literally took like 50 seconds.
Speaking of 50 seconds, we're already 7 minutes over time, and PhotoShelter has been very gracious to us, not only for providing us with the facilities and the platform and the technology to do today's webinar, but they've also consented to let us run a little late. So for the several hundred of you who are still here, we still have a little bit more content to go, and we will run a little long. So that said, let's look at XFTool.
The same people that brought you that Fixity tool that I mentioned earlier, AV Preserve, have put up a great set of little tutorials. If the thought of dealing with a command line application frightens the bejesus out of you, then this is worth looking at because it can show you what's possible. If you're, XFTool is just one of these things. It's a command line thing. You can use it to fix date or timestamps. You can add GPS information. You can selectively remove fields based on just basically writing the specific code to say minus this, and it'll remove the information in that particular field. So it's very customizable in that sense, but you've got to know what you're typing in there. There is a version of it on the Windows side. If we flip forward to the next, you can see a screen capture of
My mouse went wild again. I apologize for that.
Well, for those of you on the Windows platform, there's a graphical user interface version of ExifTool
There it
called
is.
ExifTool GUI, and it gives you a portion of the control that you have with the command line tool. You can't do everything that you can with the command line tool, but there's an awful lot. I mean, if you wanted to do time shifting with a set of images after your battery died and you forgot to set the right date and time, you can do that. And there are a number of other programs that kind of use this ExifTool package in the background. Like I mentioned earlier, GeoSetter uses ExifTool to write, so it can write to not just JPEGs and TIFF files, but it can write directly to RAW files. Or it can write XMP sidecar files. So.
And for those of you who do like to go in and change or edit or eliminate some of the EXIF data, lens data, shooting speed data, so on and so forth, EXIF tool will let you do that. It will let you go in and nuke a field inside your RAW files or your DMGs, as well as your TIFFs and JPEGs.
So you could go in and remove, virtually like everything except for maybe the GPS information, or depending on where the image was taken. If you don't want people to know precisely where that was, you could even go ahead and remove that.
So it's a great photographer's tool.
Yeah. And lastly, because this and a number of other things, we would be remiss if we did not mention, spreadsheet and text editor tools. There are a bunch of them out there. Most people, when it comes into spreadsheets, they're dealing with the ubiquitous Excel, although to be honest with you, depending on the number of files that you're dealing with, you can do an awful lot even in the Google Docs. When it comes to text editors, there's a whole bunch of them out there on the Mac side, BB Edits,
Text Wrangler.
Text Wrangler, yeah, from the bare bones folks is great. On the Windows side, I've kind of navigated or moved over to something called Notepad++. Or NoteTab++, which is it's got a bunch of additional little tools in there that you can use to normalize and check data and give you word counts and all sorts of other things. So,
okay, Dave, we've done it. We've done 3 great techniques. We've done 5 free tools. We've done 5 industrial strength tools for working with the stuff inside files to make them more saleable to, well, they don't phone home, but at least if someone has the file and wants to find out where home is, metadata is one of the keys to that. And David, congratulations, you've done a fabulous job. Thank you so very, very much. I really also need to thank all the folks at PhotoShelter who have given us such a terrific opportunity to work together, and the platform. It's been just terrific working with you guys. Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks, Amy. And a special thanks to Andrew. On the ASPP side, thanks to Jane, Cecilia, and Susan for helping develop the webinar. And I would just like to remind you all that ASPP is offering a one-time special. If you join or renew and use the term metadata, it's 20% off of the membership dues. It's a discount. And it's META, DATA, and ASPP is self-evident, ASPP.com. So on behalf of ASPP and PhotoShelter, I thank you all very much. I presume you've been a terrific audience. We've gotten a lot of great questions, both through the GoToWebinar software and also on the Twitter stream. ASPP will have a web page tomorrow that lists the resources that David and I have discussed in today's webinar, and we'll also have a embedded player that will let you see the entire webcast over again, or that you can shoot out to one of your friends if you found something that you think is really valuable. So thank you all for being in attendance. It's been a great afternoon. ASPP will see you with another webinar after the turn of 2014. That's it from New York. Thank you very much.
Thank you.